There we go. All right, can everyone see that?
If you would like to put it in presentation mode so that we don't, yeah, that's good. Yep.
Oh, is it not? Okay.
Yeah,
It's in
that's good.
presentation mode now?
That's
Okay.
good.
All right. Okay, so hello, my name is Hannah. My capstone project involved expanding a short story that I had been working on into a longer novel. Trying to figure out how to expand something shorter into a longer piece, which is something I've always wanted to work on. I've taken a couple of creative writing classes and was really interested in working on this. And since I had all this free reign to do a fun, exciting project, I wanted to do that. Let's see. This button. All right, so I do have, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to read this with this share screen on. Let's see. I have like a summary instead of reading you guys the entire piece that I wrote. That might be a little tedious. So I'll just read that out for you. Let's see, just have a couple of, there we go. All right, so every single story that has ever been written or ever will be written is contained within the library, an infinite universe separate from all others that is home to the librarians. The librarians catalog every story that is ever created, each of which is created by the sacred great fire of creation. They can read about the lives of any universe, access any book except for 3. The first story to ever be created, the last story to ever be created, and the story of the world that they originated from. When the great fire is abruptly reduced to a single spark, incapable of producing any more stories, the librarians must either accept that the end of their mission has arrived and that nothing new will ever be created, or find a way to restart the great fire. Mira decides that the last story that the great fire produced must hold all the answers, that something within that story has gone terribly wrong and needs correcting. She and a group of like-minded librarians decide to enter that universe themselves and figure out how they can set things right. Mira and her friends enter this last story, unsure of what to expect. What they find is an incredibly complex world, which shouldn't be possible considering how recently the story began. Upon meeting the main characters of the world, they are eventually able to find what is keeping the story from progressing. Someone in this world is still alive due to the intervention of characters who shouldn't exist in this universe at all. After living in a perfect, impartial library for hundreds of years, Mira must confront the fact that the fate of this world and the fate of the multiverse itself is in her hands. Her actions may forever isolate her from the people that she has quickly grown so close with. After all, the mysterious hero that's caught her eye would never speak to her again if she took matters into her own hands. Why does she find herself so inexplicably drawn to a stranger that she barely knows? Does she have the right to kill someone in order to restore the great fire of creation, which will create millions more lives? Even if she does, will she be capable of doing so? Sorry, it was a little long, but I wanted to give you kind of an idea of what I was working on there.
Sure.
All right, so one of the main things that I did for my capstone project was take an 8-hour writing seminar by one of my favorite authors, Maggie Stiefvater. She's written a couple of notable books, like the Raven Cycle series. I don't know if you've heard of her, but I thought that since she was such a notable author that she would have a lot of good advice for how to start writing the novel, just kind of where I was stuck, because I had the idea of expanding my short story, but I wasn't really sure how to begin. So some of the stuff that she recommended was dividing the writing process into multiple different sections. And one of the main parts was first to start with internal process instead of beginning to write all of your story down. And some of the main parts of that she suggested looking over were the mood of the story you wanted to write, the general ideas, and then moving on to the premise. And once you have those solidified, to move on to actually writing your story. And that's the external process. And some of the different things that you can use to start writing down your story is a summary, which is what I just read out, a synopsis, which is a little bit longer and more detailed, a limited outline, which is she described as writing out a summary for each chapter, or a complete outline, which outlines pretty much every detail in the story, and then you write in everything else later. And one of the other things that I found very useful out of the seminar was the 3-act structure that she said was very useful for writing a novel. This kind of divides out how each part of this plot should be written out. So the 3 parts that she described were to establish normal in your world that you're writing, then to start a quest, to save the world after breaking the world, and then find a solution for your characters. And then what she described as big bad emotions, or working through everything else in the first 2 acts and the characters winning in the end. So in the story that I've been setting up writing, I start with everyday life in the library, this magical place where every story that's ever been created lives and the librarians live. And then at the end of my first act, the great fire that produces these stories stops working, which is the problem. And then my main character, Mira, just figures out that in order to save this great fire, she must kill one of the people in this last story in order to let the universe keep going as it should. And in the end, she must choose whether or not to do this, or to not kill this person, or and perhaps sacrifice the rest of the universe in the process. So during my capstone project and what I've been planning and working on, I've learned a lot of different methods for brainstorming a novel, some reliable steps to use to flesh out and expand an idea from a nebulous concept to a physical product, and what to focus upon when writing a first draft, and what can be added in and altered during revision, which was very useful because at first I had no idea where to start and what to save for later in the process. And going forward, I plan to continue to revise and edit the story I'm working on, because I still have quite a bit to go until I have a full-length novel, to work towards completing a full-length manuscript and to apply what I've learned to my writing going forward. And that's it.
Thank you, Hannah. How do you define a full-length novel? I mean, usually people talk in terms of number of words.
I think from what I looked up, somewhere around like 40 to 50,000 words eventually, but that's not where I am at the moment. I'm not near that.
What? So you said the process of creation here is you already had a short story, and then you wanted to expand it out. How far have you expanded it out? I mean, did the structure of the short story was presumably a little different, right? I mean, you changed the structure. The idea may be the same, but the structure's changed, right?
Yeah, the story that I wrote was pretty much describing the library and like the idea of the universe, and then at the end of the short story was when the library, like the stories were stopped and there were no more stories produced. So I kind of ended it on that cliffhanger, and I'd like to expand before the short story and afterwards. Yeah.
I see. So in the short story, there was no consideration of restarting the Great Fire, and there was no consideration of how to do that, what the solution might be, what the conflict might be. That was not in the short story.
No, yeah, it was a lot of it. I didn't have a lot of character based either. A lot of it was describing the library, and then after finishing the short story, I've been throughout this pondering different ways to, resolve everything that I left open-ended on that.
So I was interested in what your mentor there, I forget her name, said. I mean, there's got to be, a number of different ways to approach something like this. And it seemed from what you've just described that she's saying you want to have all your ducks in line at the beginning before you start to write. So, like I say, there's got to be other ways to do it. I mean, you can start and not really know where it's going until you get there, right? But you're following that model. You're getting, you know how this is going to evolve before you actually write it all.
Yeah, I've come up with a lot of like the plot and like the summary of where it's going to go. I don't have I'm like been working on fleshing out a more detailed chapter by chapter type of outline, but I have a good idea of where the actual story is heading at this point, which is good.
Are you doing it chronologically? Like, okay, I just finished chapter 1, now I'm going to write chapter 2, or are you jumping around?
I've been jumping around. I've been working a lot too on like the outline to try to figure out where things are, and then writing different snippets. Because I downloaded this writing software called Scrivener, and you can write different scenes and then kind of arrange them as the final product when you want to put them all together, which is helpful.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. That was very interesting. Meg?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I would definitely echo what Stephen said. And this is like a really interesting project. We love to see these kinds of creative, artistic projects. So I guess my question would be, what kind of background or what kind of experience have you had in writing something substantive such as this? So that's part one of my question. And then part two is, what would you say is the new learning that has occurred through this project that's maybe different from other writing that you've done?
Most of my background has been in like short stories, creative writing. I've taken creative writing courses, and a lot of it's been like given a prompt and had like 10-15 minutes to write a story, and that ends up being, you know, somewhere between like 2 and 5 or so pages. So I've never written something besides, you know, like when I was a kid and writing little picture books, like something that's any longer than that.
Right.
So a lot of this process was just trying to figure out how to feasibly wrap my head around like a concept that was big enough that could be translated to a longer story. And that's why I wanted to watch a seminar to at least have some concept of how some authors are able to transcribe everything they're thinking into, you know, hundreds, like thousands of words. So I don't have very much experience in that.
Okay. Well, I really like that you incorporated somebody else's perspective in this process into your own. What was the biggest takeaway from the 8-hour seminar that you did?
A lot of it was little technical things. Like I didn't even consider like writing in third person versus first person. I had just written it in third person, then I realized maybe I want to explore first person. And a lot of things like how to develop characters, which I never really considered, and how to take the mood that you want the overall story to have to be your basis for everything else, which is very interesting.
That's great. Those are 3 great examples that sound really relevant to what it is that you're working on. So, well, nice job, Hannah. Any questions from anybody else?
I have a couple more questions. Hannah, what's the difference between mood and premise?
Mood is sort of the overall, like, do I want this to be creepy or happy or joyful or suspenseful? And premise as in like the actual storyline of the novel, like my premise being, I guess, exploring, I guess kind of exploring a higher power in a sense, trying to figure out what created everything and how to fix what's gone wrong, I believe.
Do you have a target end date? Are you shooting to finish this by a certain date?
I'm not sure. I mean, I definitely want to have like a very solid version of my like full outline and a lot more writing to finish by the end of this project, just so I can have a very clear starting point. But as far as the whole novel, I'm not really sure how long. I've never really undertaken something so big, so I'm not quite sure what's realistic.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you very much. And now
I had a question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Dan.
Oh, I was just sorry. I was just going to ask: is this going to be more of like a young adult novel? Is this going to be like more adult oriented? And kind of maybe what were some of your inspirations? Just because it sounds like a cool story and something I would actually read.
Yeah, I think probably young adult. I've read a lot of young adult novels. The author that I took the seminar from has a lot of young adult, like kind of fantasy-esque novels, like fantasy in real life. Some of my other favorite stories, like the Graceling series, is very fantasy driven. So it's probably going to be like fantasy, magic, young adult, that type of demographic.
Cool. Cool. Well, good luck with it. Sounds like a real cool concept. So I'd be interested to see it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Cal,
Thanks,
you're
Dan.
up.
Awesome. Let me pull up my screen. Well, definitely not the slide that I meant. Second. There we go. So My project was a Twine story, which could feasibly also be called the Twine game, and it's called Portraits. So I wanted to explore the idea of identity by presenting basically a series of memories and allowing the reader to investigate and make choices while navigating through them in order to essentially establish identity as fluid and changing. So to start, I did some reading on identity, which took me into all sorts of different fields, but the two examples I have here took me into some visual arts research, which touched a lot on how, I guess, like the internet and media have been affecting especially young people and how we frame identity. And then I also did a little bit of reading from Matthew Engel and how anthropologists would be approaching identity, which took it in more of a cultural and I guess socio-political direction. And then I also read a whole bunch of Twine stories. So I have had only read a few interactive text games, which is what Twine creates, before I started my project. So I sat down and went through a whole bunch of them because there's all sorts. And the one that stood out to me most was Soft Earth. It's a story that the player navigates through about a young transgender girl and her grandma who recently passed away. I'm not going to go too into it because I don't want to waste time, but it's a very good story. So for Twine, basically, it maps out little chunks of story in a map that you can see here. Like it progresses straightforward through, and then you can like bridge off depending on what choice you make and return. Or later on, there's a closer shot of the bottom part there. So this is some of my memories that people are allowed to choose between. And essentially what happens is you can go through a certain number, and once you've done so, a new option opens up, and that allows you to progress through the rest of the story. So the reason that I picked Twine instead of your basic novel or short story novelette format, first of all, is the lack of a market standard. I, as an artist and writer, don't, I guess, like to cater to money making. Audiences, I think, are very significant and important, but I don't like my art to be restricted by the standards that have sort of been developed and set as a goal of selling as many copies as possible. So that was the first reason that I like Twine. It doesn't really have a market standard. Most of the people making things for Twine are making them to be freely available on the internet. After that, it's controlled pacing. So unlike a novel where you can flip back and forth or go from one part of the page to something a little bit further back on the page, you're presented with certain sections of text, one after the other. And then the presentation of choices encourages engagement on the part of the reader. You feel a little bit more part of the story when you're choosing what direction it goes. And it helps also a little bit with the identity aspect. As a story about identity, you can't really cover everyone's identity to make it perfectly relatable. So you have to select the character and the type of identity that you're going to go for, and you can make it a little bit easier for the reader to bridge that gap if they're the one making the choices that this character is making. I also wanted to emphasize cause and effect. When it comes to identity, I'm posing the idea of identity as something that's fluid and affected by the environment. So choices affecting what the identity eventually becomes is basically the bottom line of the point. And I also wanted the experience to be changeable between readings, also to emphasize more fluidity of identity, but it also encourages rereads. And I think that that's fun for giving the story more value. So when it came to identity in my story, I focused on two main topics. History, which comes back to the idea of identity being affected by the environment. And I did that by placing memories as like the focal point of how your identity is built. and the idea that there are multiple kinds of yous that form throughout your life. And then the other focus I had was gender. I'm trans, and I wanted to reflect that in my work. So the main character is transgender, and I wanted to explore the idea of gender as changeable, which is not something that people talk about regarding transness a lot. There are definitely trans people who don't feel they were born as the gender they currently are. They feel that it was something that evolved as they grew. And I wanted to talk about that less recognized aspect of gender. So the actual story features our main character awakening without memories in what would be dubbed an identity mall. And among other things, what they buy and sell there is memories. So the main character has sold all of their memories, and now they're awake and don't have any. So they don't know why they sold them or like what they're doing there. So as the main character, you are adopted by essentially a security guard at the mall, and they have to navigate you through to get some of your memories back, because otherwise you aren't going to be able to function. And you, as the reader, get to navigate through those memories, choosing which parts of them are like most important to you to explore, and what order you want to experience them, whether you want to experience all of them or only some of them. Maybe one seems too traumatic to put upon this character that you're navigating as. And then along with that, there's the aspect of customization. So probably most prominent example is you get to name yourself, but in the memories, you aren't referred to by that name because you're trans. So it gives a little bit more of that immersive experience. And it also, it kind of creeps up on behind, because you don't, when you give your name to this, to the story, you don't expect that you're not going to be called it later on. So it's, I guess I wanted to catch readers off guard a little bit by letting them name themselves, and then later in the memories, forcing a different name on them. And then here's some of the resources, links to some of the stories I read and some of the books. And that's it, if there's any questions.
Okay, Cal, that sounds like it might be it might be confusing. But I have some questions. So
Yeah.
So I think I get it. But so in the story, I mean, maybe you don't want to have any give any spoilers, but does the character figure out why they sold their memories in the first place?
Yes. So my thought regarding that is that our main character sold their memories in order to very specifically be rid of them. It's another theme that I haven't had as much time to approach yet, but it's the idea that life is difficult. The things that form your identity are difficult, and sometimes maybe you want to be rid of them. And regaining the memories, the end theme is that even though life is difficult, there's things worth retaining from it. So the end is you choosing to retain the memories. So my current thought, because the actual written work is partway through, the project kind of exploded in terms of size to something that might be a little bit closer to novel length than I expected. But yeah. So the ending that I'm thinking is you're able to either forget all of your memories again, in which case you get transported back to the start of the story, or you're able to choose and get the true conclusion where you keep your memories and reinforce the theme of they're worth having, and your experiences and the way that you've changed because of them is worth having.
So I think maybe you just answered my second question, which is when you come under the aegis of the security guard and they help you retrieve. I don't know whether you're retrieving the same memories that you sold, or whether you've it's a mall, so presumably you could buy different memories that are different from what you originally had. So are you getting your own memories back, or are you getting a whole slew of different memories?
That's a good question. So the mall, basically anytime someone sells memories, they retain them for a few days just in case of things like this happening. Basically like a backup. So yes, you're retaining your own old memories. And then it's like basically the security guard can see which ones you sold. They take a fingerprint on entry and it's saved under your fingerprint and name if you give them a name when you enter the mall. And then they're able to access that and restore those memories.
Okay, so the memories that the hero, the main character gets as he or she goes through the novel, goes through the story, are what the person's original memories are, or can they be different?
They cannot be different. They're the original memories.
They are the originals. Okay.
Yes,
All right.
yeah. They're limited,
but the difference now is that the gender dimension is playing into with the original memories. Was there a gender dimension there, or is there a gender dimension, a new dimension for this particular character?
So it's not a new dimension, but it starts off kind of new because you're introduced the memories in chronological order. So you start off being presented a certain way, and the memories, like as the reader and as the main character who doesn't know anything, there's no gender aspect because you don't have the memories that could induce that. So then later you come across the gender aspect and it's introduced.
I see. Do you talk at all about the nature of memory? I mean, the psychology of it, the unconscious and all that stuff, or do you just say memories?
I didn't focus on that for this part. I guess because my main goal was identity more than memory itself, but
Sure.
that is definitely relevant. So it could be something I could store for later.
Okay, well, that sounds absolutely fascinating. You know, normally we get 3 totally different presentations, but to get 2 creative writing projects in one shot it's cool. I like that. Okay, all right, Meg.
Thank you. So Kel, this is so interesting. So my question for you is, I can draw some of my own conclusions about how the structure is really mirroring some of the experience of someone that's trans. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you chose that structure? Because I find that so interesting. And it's complex, but so is a lot of life. So, I mean, I'd love your thoughts and just to provide me a little bit more context about why you designed it like that.
So I guess it comes back to more personal things. For me, like as a kid, gender was not really anything I thought about in the first place. In fact, I found it annoying when people did. It was something that kind of felt forced upon me. But that was the extent of people talk about their pasts where they every day wished to be a different gender, etc. I didn't have that experience, and I resonate more with people who, I'm non-binary, but with the experience of binary trans people who talk about, say, a trans man who talks about when he was a girl. So the idea of when I was a kid, I think I probably was just a little girl, but that's not really what I am now. And I want that experience to be reflected largely because it sort of, aside from the fact that it's not talked about as much, it undermines the idea that the reason that trans people are valid in their transgenderness, I suppose, is that there's an underlying psychological difference in their brain that has caused it. I don't think that is the only way that transness is experienced. I think it is definitely rings true for some people. And I want to, I guess, enforce that validity upon the reader.
So, I mean, that's really interesting. Can you take it a step further and talk about the structure of choosing, how you chose the structure is specifically choosing memories, selling memories, choosing a name, someone else using a name.
Oh, geez.
And it's not too, I mean, I don't want to ask a really personal question. I'm just
no,
curious.
it's okay.
Yeah.
You're fine. It's just, I guess, connecting a lot of ideas in my head. So I guess, as far as memories go, the structure of specifically choosing memories actually came about a little bit differently. It was largely because I had a whole lot of themes I was trying to wrangle with. And to start writing, because I wanted to actually start writing, that's how I brainstorm. I was able to focus on writing memories because once I actually put together my theme and the like overarching point of the story, I wanted to be able to thread those memories together for sure, and basically build around what I had already written. So that structure, I guess, actually evolved separately. And then as I was looking at it, the idea of memories and identity, because I had been thinking about identity as a changeable concept separately, I guess, they merged together very nicely in my head. And that was why I wound up running with it. As far as like specifically the gender aspect, I mean, it gives the reader like, first off, the reader is not necessarily going to be transgender reading, but if they're able to apply specifically the memories and empty out whatever their own experiences are, it gives them a different kind of insight than just reading a single prescribed transgender experience, and it allows them to act some agency where instead of it being just taking in one single story that they couldn't possibly relate to or have any experiences like similar to, their own agency is pushing it forward, and thus they're forced to consider that maybe they relate to it too, if that makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. I think the complexity and how you're thinking through all of this, I think is just, it's really remarkable. And I actually think that, I think the fact that you landed on memory because whether you're talking about gender identity or just identity more broadly is entirely housed within our memories. And so, and how we've experienced those things. And how accurate those memories are. So I think it's just, there are so many layers, and I think it's really, really interesting. So I look forward to seeing the final product. Just quick last question. And you did talk through this. So Twine is actually a platform of telling a story.
Yes. Yeah. So
okay.
I don't know, like I assume projects have, I know I've seen some of them in watching the videos, like Unity is a game development program. Or like Game Maker, that kind of stuff. It's the same thing except for text-based games.
Okay, great.
And people make games with it, they make stories, they make interactive stories. It's kind of bridges apart in different directions.
All right, so I'm familiar with Unity and some of those other parallels. I hadn't heard of Twine, so, and love the exposure to it. So this is great. Nice job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions from anybody else?
Yeah, I have another couple of questions, Carol. So I really liked your last point there, not just the immediate last, but the point you made about engaging the agency of the reader, whether or not they're trans, to see that you know, it's not just one thing. It can be have different aspects. But so my question though is, are the memories, did you create these memories for the purpose of the story, or are they mostly autobiographical, or you know?
It's a mix. The ones that are close to autobiographical, I changed a little bit or a lot. I didn't want to write an autobiography, but I did want it to have a little bit of that influence of my own life, just because that's what I'm most familiar with, and I want the things they're reading with to be fleshed out enough for them to get that more complex understanding.
Right. Okay, great. I hope you pull it all together and we get to see the final product.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice presentation. Dan, you're up.
All right. So I'm going to talk about my graphic novel. No, I'm kidding. I'm not a writer. Let me just hit share screen here. All right, so you guys can see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, not the presenter view, correct? Just making sure.
I can see yes, I can see the presentation mode, and I can see you.
Okay, all right, perfect. So I'm going to talk to you guys about PB&J All Day. This is a food truck concept that I have put together. It's kind of the brainchild of myself, my wife, and I have a business partner. So this is kind of the culmination of my years in the hospitality industry, as well as my schooling and things like that here. And so I focused on business and learning that aspect of it, because the food service aspect and hospitality has definitely been my world for a long time, but I wanted to learn a little bit more about that and then potentially owning my own business. So I've got a lot of stuff to cover. So without further ado, let's get going into this. So a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Dan Levato, and I came to RIT in 2016 as the sous chef. In 2018, I was promoted to the chef de cuisine. I worked in that role until last year, where I focused on my schooling and wanted to essentially graduate a little faster than at the pace that I was at. So I've stepped down into a daytime supervisor role, which has allowed me to focus on schooling and getting on track to graduate in December of this year. So I'm very excited to be done with that. Not that I haven't loved my time here, but I've definitely over school. It's been a long time. And I got my food service start back in 2004. I started in Wegmans, but my dad's a chef, so I kind of grew up in the industry, and I never actually wanted to get into the industry. And when I was 20 and had moved out, I cooked for myself and figured out that I was actually really kind of talented with it, without really expecting to be so. And I really enjoyed it, and I really got a lot of enjoyment out of cooking for friends and family, and have just honed my skills. And a lot of what I learned originally was all self-taught. I started running my first kitchen in 2010 and have continually scaled up to larger and larger kitchens. So it's been interesting to go from kitchens that did a couple $100 a day to running kitchens that were doing millions of dollars a year. So I never really had the intention of owning my own restaurant at all. I just as the markets have shifted, and as I've kind of evolved in my skill set, it's kind of like it got to the point where I was like, I think it's time to start working for myself and stop working for the man, So without talking too much about myself, let's get into the concept of peanut butter and jelly all day. PB&J All Day, what is it? So we want to do a food truck, and our mission is really to create a fun culture. We want an exciting operation that serves great food. We're fun, we're quirky people, and we want our personalities to shine through, and we want customers to do the same, and we want to really excite people about it. Yeah, it's like a bit of nostalgia, and it's a bit of like classic food, but we're going to put some creative spins on that, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. I've got a demo menu to show everyone. I say good vibes only, truck, because that's really what we're looking for. We're kind of we're going to have a tie-dye theme and all of that stuff, and we're really going for that kind of like hippie kind of mentality. And beyond that, I take a lot of pride in what I do, even if it is something as peanut butter and jelly. And I don't like to settle for merely adequate or just okay. When it comes to food, presentation, the products we use, I believe in buying quality products and passing that sort of quality onto the customer. Because if you invest in good things for the customer beforehand, treat it right, and put respect into it, you're gonna put that back into the customer's hands, and that's going to show through your passion for the food and things like that. So that is our concept. Now you might be wondering, why start a food truck? So obviously there's some pros and cons to it. The biggest ones I focused on here were control. We control the hours, the menu, the product. There's a flow to everything, and we dictate that together. And it really comes down to work-life balance. I've worked in restaurants where I was working 60, 75 hours a week, and it wears on you. And the idea to involve my wife in this, and to have my partner in life doing something with me that we're both passionate about, because she's very customer service oriented and I'm more the back of the house food guy, is really exciting to be able to go on an adventure with her together like that. Secondly, there's less risk. The cost to start a restaurant typically ranges about $95,000 to about $2 million for a traditional brick and mortar restaurant. The national average is about $375,000. And conversely, to start a food truck, you're looking at anywhere from $30,000 to maybe $175,000, maybe $200,000, just kind of with where prices are now because of inflation and post-pandemic kind of shenanigans. The other thing is it's a mobile operation. We have control, so our opportunities are out there to go and do something in a business park for a morning service, and then be at Party in the Park for a concert doing a completely different or a similar menu, but maybe a little bit different later that night. And that's just not something you can do with a regular brick and mortar restaurant. And lastly, it's really about community, because the folks that hit up food trucks, a lot of them become fans of those food trucks. And they look forward to meeting those people at different venues and things like that. And I've seen that at the food truck rodeo. And I've spent a lot of time working with the owner of Macaroon. His name's Chuck Andrews, and he's been really my mentor through this project. And we've had a lot of great conversations, and I've seen the camaraderie between their customers and also the community of food truck workers themselves. So it's a really fun environment that I want to be a part of. And now, of course, because we've got pros, we're going to have some cons. There's going to be some downsides to the food truck business. And these I see as really not just necessarily obstacles, but things to challenge you and make yourself better, because I do look for challenges in life. First off is responsibilities. Everything is going to be under our wheelhouse. We're going to be working owners. So administrative tasks, payroll, insurance concerns, legal stuff, food vendor issues, all of that stuff. If a truck breaks down, we're going to have ways of figuring out how to take care of that, because we're the ones ultimately responsible for it. No one else is coming to bail us out. So it's a scary thought, but also kind of cool at the same time. The permits, there's a lot of permits and a lot of inspections and things like that. And it doesn't always cover all of your bases. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide, but there's a lot of administrative stuff to think about. Thirdly, there's competition. Of course, I did talk about the community of food truck vendors and things like that, but ultimately you are competing against one another, and Rochester is only so big. And we are kind of nearing, I feel like, the end of that food truck bubble, where it's going to be close to like saturation in the market. So I'm hoping that we don't get into the game too late. And we do have some ideas to pivot and things like that outside of that. But we're gonna hone in on this concept, and if we have to pivot, that's what we do. That's what we do in the food service industry. And the last real downside to the food truck industry is working in tight spaces. It's something that's not good for folks who are claustrophobic. It's cramped, it's loud, it's busy. There's a lot of dangerous stuff in there, hot stuff, sharp stuff. Just it requires a lot of communication and awareness of what's going on, and you have to have a mindset to work in a space that's small like that. I've worked in multiple small kitchens as well as big ones, and it does challenge you in different ways than you're not necessarily expecting. And lastly, it limits what you can do with a menu, because you don't have a fully functioning commercial kitchen where you've got a storeroom that's the size of your truck, and you don't have big freezers and coolers. So you can only carry so much stuff, which means you can only make so much stuff on the menu. So it means you need to be creative with your menu, and you need to be really dialed in with all of your ordering. And the 5 P's: proper planning prevents poor performance. You really have to make that your mantra. So next, going into the permits and inspections, these are just minimum requirements for the city and for the county. We'd have to get a solicitor's license through the county clerk's office. And to even be able to do that, you have to create an entity that can be legally recognized. So we would have to form a partnership. And then once we get all the paperwork, and by the way, this is just some of the paperwork. I printed out a bunch of it. There's a lot of different fees and things to keep in mind. So that's a tome there of things. And I just wanted to show you guys that to give you a little bit of an idea. There's a sales tax certificate. There's the health department inspections, and those are also yearly or sometimes multiple times per year. There's a minimum of $1 million insurance coverage, which I actually found out was much cheaper than I expected. I think $2 million policy through a company that does this for food trucks is actually on $299 a year, which I was expecting much worse. But I mean, $1 million, if you think about it as a business, isn't even that much of coverage if something were to happen. So there's definitely going to be some more factors into that. On top of all that, you have to have fire and safety inspections. There's multiple ones. There's not just one. I believe there's two, and that can't happen until the health department checks you out. So there's all these steps to follow. And all of your employees have to have government issued IDs on file with the health department for your truck to operate. And the final big piece of the puzzle is you have to have a commissary kitchen. And in other words, you need to have a main kitchen where you're producing all of your prep for the day, the weekend, whatever it is. Obviously, you're feeding people off of your truck and doing things a la minute on the truck, but you have to have a USDA approved kitchen that has all the commercial equipment and is inspected and is up to codes. And there is a local one in Rochester that offers that service, and they do charge an hourly fee to work on their stations. They also charge fees to store things in their coolers, in their dry storage areas, and all of that. So that those costs do add up, and these are all things that we need to be cognizant of. So that's just kind of the minimum requirements to get started. And to get started, it's probably going to cost us at least $100,000. And again, I know that sounds like a lot of money, because it is, but when you compare that to the cost of starting a brick and mortar food restaurant, it's significantly less. And really, between the truck, the equipment, the initial inventory, permits, trademarking, licensing, all these little things that go into it, it's going to be, I'm guessing, at least $100,000 right now. That's kind of the number we're shooting for, but I know that things could change. And there's always recurring fees that can go up every year just to go to events. If we want to go to, say, the Lilac Festival and be a vendor there, it could cost us $1,500 or maybe more just to sell our food there. So those costs have to be part of your planning, and you have to recognize that number should never really be 10% more than your takeaway from your, that's the goal anyways. It should never be more than 10% of your revenue from any event that you do. The good news is, because I've worked in this industry a long time, and my business partner has a lot of experience in the industry as well, we do know a lot of vendors. So I'm hoping that is going to benefit us in the way of getting us on the right track, kind of getting our foot in the door in a few scenarios, and also hopefully saving us some money, because maybe somebody will do something for a little less if I pay them cash on the slide, and then if we keep it on the books. Shh, don't tell anybody. So next, kind of going over my timeline on this. We're in the inception phase right now. It's the time for us to brainstorm. We're putting all of our ideas out there, and really nothing is off the table. And eventually reality is going to come and kind of knock us down a couple of pegs, and we will know what we're really capable of doing. So in August of 2023, my business partner returns to Rochester. He's actually in Ohio, taking care of some business and some prior engagements. So we've been doing a lot of this stuff via phone and text message and emails. And this project itself is really all just me putting this together and presenting it to him and saying, all right, now what do you think about all of this? Because he's more the money guy and I'm more the food guy. So we have kind of our roles defined as well. Plus I'm not graduating until December of this year. So that's another thing kind of keeping us, this is more the back burner, and we're working towards this goal. So once Rob comes back, I'm done with school. The quarters 3 and 4 of 2023, that'll be taking care of the funding, the supplies, permits, really any of the legalities and things we need to get up and running. Our goal is to get this on the road by May of 2024. The season hits, generally about late April, early May, when the food trucks really start to pop out and being able to hit festivals, especially Rochester being known as a festival town. That's our goal, is to be able to get there for that. So a little bit more marketing. I've covered some of this stuff. I did a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis. and I really, a few of the things I didn't really talk about, like our truck is an actual, it's a walking or driving billboard. You know, we're planning on doing a tie-dye wrap, and once people see that, it gets stuck in your eye. And like I said, we're fun people. We want to have a lot of fun with this. And I think we're going to stick in people's brains once they see what we got going on. Different threats. I've talked a little bit about the competition, but in terms of like food costs, those keep going up because of inflation and supply issues and things like that. I've experienced a lot of that, even pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic, it's been a literal nightmare on a lot of times. And those are things we can't control. Truck equipment and maintenance, those sort of things, we can't control any of that either. We can just obviously prepare for it and know who to call if we do run into any issues. Staffing issues, we've seen the great resignation since the pandemic has really kicked in. And so we're going to have some issues to be concerned about. But again, they're just challenges that'll make us work that much harder and that much better.
Dan, you have one more minute.
All right, heard. I'm almost done. So continuing on the marketing, I just made a quick little Instagram post. This is kind of, we know that Instagram or Facebook, TikTok, Meta, whatever the heck it is, whatever the socials are doing at that time, that's going to be our bread and butter to really communicate with our folks and see where they can see where we are. We can talk to them about our specials and entice them with pictures of food and let them know what we've got going on. And speaking of food, this is the fun part. Obviously, as being a chef, I get real excited about making menus. So we want to do standard products and have weekly, monthly specials. If we can do local stuff, we want to buy local when we can, using seasonal produce when it's available. I want to take creative, I want to take comfort foods and do creative spins on those. And, you know, you can see here, I did a bacon burger topped with a peanut sauce, smoked cheddar, a bacon jam, and pickled jalapenos. Like, it sounds weird, but when you've had it, you're like, oh, dude, this is awesome. You know, and we'll do different desserts and things like that. And so beyond the menu, obviously you have to have a truck. So I've made a kind of 2D representation of like my dream truck with all the equipment that I want on it. And I know that some of you guys may not be familiar with all the equipment, but we're going to need a fryer. We're going to need sandwich prep coolers, tables, flat top griddles to cook the sandwiches, sandwich presses. We're going to have to keep things hot. We're going to have small coolers and freezers on there. And in addition to all of the actual food we'll be making, we do want to have some sides in terms of just like maybe chips that we might do our own kettle chips and sell those. And we'll have to have some drinks, water, Pepsi, Coke, whatever it is. But we really want this to be a fun, fully functioning food truck that's going to draw people in and have a heck of a lot of fun doing it. I don't know if you guys know the peanut butter and jelly time thing from back in the day. I'm dating myself a little bit. That was back in the early 2000s. But we thought about even having a little speaker that like plays that like every hour and stuff like that. Like, we just want to have fun with this, and we want to get out of the office and do some really great things and have a lot of fun. And that's what we're all about. And that food is my life, and I want to do something fun with it. So that's my presentation, and I hope I made everyone hungry for some sandwiches.
Yeah, the picture of that sandwich looked has indeed made me look forward to lunch. Anyway,
beautiful.
So I did want to ask you, and you touched on this in terms of licenses. You can't just show up, right? I mean, so there's an event going on. No. How does that work?
Yeah, so I didn't want to spend too much time on that. So I was hoping someone was going to ask that. So you need a number of different licenses. The permits that you require to even get up and running will cover you in, say, the center city of Rochester. But to go to the farmers market, you need to go through whoever the operational manager is of that. And in terms of showing up like on the streets, you're only allowed 2 food trucks per zone. And there's certain zones during certain times that the chief of police will say, you can go here or you can't go here based on special events and things like that. So there's a lot of, like I said, kind of background work that you're going to have to do to make sure before you go anywhere. Yeah, you can't just show up in front of somebody's house and start, handing out sandwiches. Unfortunately, it's not that simple.
So, for example, I live just outside Durand Eastman Park, and I'm always down by the lake. And if you know that area, there are 4 parking areas, A through D. And I don't remember ever seeing a food truck down there, but presumably there's lots of opportunity there. How would that work?
If I remember correctly, Durand is actually one of the areas that's off limits. I would have to double check my notes, but I remember that sticks in my head as being kind of awkward, that it was one of the areas that there are areas in the city that are off limits or around Rochester. And I believe Durand was one of them.
Why would they be off limits?
It didn't say, it just said that I don't know if it has something to do with the zoning, or they're trying to like not take business away from an area that's already kind of hurting, or what.
If it is, I was going to add, if it is a state park, there are regulations about having commercial vehicles and commercial entities in state parks.
Okay, and that could be something that I missed in my research. So that sounds probably very legitimate. That's
probably one reason. They, you know, there are lots of ways that could be disruptive to ecology, to, you know, the environment, to lots of different things. So, and state parks get wonky with rules. So,
yeah.
Except it's not a state park. So anyway, you might want to look into that later, because a whole bunch of people, July 4th down there were like hundreds and thousands, almost thousands of people down there. And as far as I say, I mean, I don't remember ever seeing a food truck come. Anyway, so I have one question. How did you determine that you said you were afraid that the market might be approaching saturation? How did you determine that that has not yet happened?
Because there's still food trucks that are opening up, and the food truck industry still seems like it's growing. I mean, there was 2 or 3 new food trucks that opened up just this year that I noticed at the food truck rodeo. So based on everything that I've talked about with Chuck Andrews, it doesn't seem like it's slowing down anytime soon. And everyone seems to be doing very well that I've spoken with in the industry. So it doesn't seem like it's reached that saturation point. And from the industry insider stuff that I've read through different hospitality blogs and things like that, it doesn't look like we've reached that saturation point, but it did kind of say that the bubble's close. So that's why I am
are you
being aware of that.
Are you county based? I mean, can you go to Batavia, or could you go to Syracuse? Or
yeah, we would be able to do that. We would just have to fill out the proper paperwork and things like that. And that's something I talked to Chuck about. He's like, you can go to Syracuse and all these things. Sometimes the people in Syracuse the community of food truck vendors do get a little annoyed sometimes when people go outside of their lines, you know, unless it's for a really special big event, because they don't want other folks coming in from out of town and taking money out of their pockets, which is a valid point. And I can totally see that. So if it's a larger scale event, they're not as kind of disagreeable with that.
Yeah. Just one last point. I do a lot of races, so I don't know if you know Fleet Feet, but maybe if you talk to Fleet Feet, they would be happy to have your food truck at their races.
Yeah, I mean, we're willing to do anything. And the other thing that my business partner and I have talked about is, we both like going to music fests and stuff like that, EDM fest. He's a big Fish fan and things like that. So we would definitely want to travel and follow, bands and do that sort of thing and set up and not necessarily like big arenas and stuff like that, but right outside of those places. I mean, they have like the Shakedown Street and stuff like that, where they sell all the goods at all these hippie shows and stuff like that. So we want to take advantage of that, because Rob has done that with in a smaller kind of idea, and like we want to just take the ball and run with it.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. Lots of
luck.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Win it. Yeah.
Yep. I hope so.
Got the enthusiasm for it.
Yeah, food's my passion. I've been doing it for a long time, and I love it. So thank you.
Meg?
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Stephen. So that was really fun to watch.
Cool.
Really engaging presentation. Obviously, the visual in your logo is great. So my question is, I work with a lot of young entrepreneurs in Sois, and I guess my question is, I'm glad to see the SWOT analysis, and obviously you're the food genius. So I'm wondering to what extent you've done a little bit of building out to know what your return on investment is going to be, and if that's been a portion of what some of your research has been. And then, you know, in terms of knowing how to project forward, and RIT's got a lot of resources for this, and maybe you've done some of this research and with your partner, you know, some shorter and some longer term goals for yourself.
Yeah, we haven't dug too deep into that portion of it yet, only because for me, I was thinking that figuring out return on investments and things like that was going to be really hard until we can iron out all the details on once we obtain the truck and spend all the money on the licenses. We have to know how much we're really going to spend before I can build out what our menu is going to cost, and then project, say, if we do 400 customers on average per day for this event, and then continue to grow those numbers. So it's definitely in the back of my mind, but I feel like we're not at that point where we're able to really get a true idea of that.
Okay. Well, and it might be worthwhile, since there are a fair amount of food trucks that are in the Rochester area, if you're connected with those people, or if there's a means to connect with them, to get a sense for a parallel business and what the first 2 years look like for them. Before you move too far along and then wait and see what will my return on investment be. Get some case studies for yourself. Do a little bit of benchmarking so that you can see. And it sounds like you've done that for the materials and the initial investment, but maybe getting a projection out, you know, so you know really at what point you can start seeing that you're recouping on some of that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a conversation that I did have with Chuck again. And that was one of the questions I asked him, like, how long was it before you were profitable? Because I know that really no business, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say no. But very few businesses are profitable within the first year in terms of food service industry. But Chuck did say that he did okay, and it wasn't until year 2, but he also had some other financial things that were kind of keeping him tied back a little bit further. So he would have been maybe a little bit more successful had he not had those other financial obligations. But yeah, by the second year, he was starting to hit the numbers that he wanted to. And the beautiful thing about knowing Chuck and working with Chuck, because he's a vendor who's been here on our RIT campus a number of times, and we really forged a strong bond because he would ask me questions at the dining commons when I was the chef and ask about equipment. And then I started talking to him about my ideas, because this is an idea that's been rolling around in my head to start a food truck. And we had 2 different concepts in mind, and this is the one that we're running with. So we do have a backup concept as well, just in case. But just talking with him and just having him be that source of knowledge has been so helpful. And he really makes me think about, like, if you're on this truck, how are you going to make this happen from point A to point B and get it to the customer? And so when it comes to looking more again at the return on investment and financials and things like that, I definitely am going to use him and maybe abuse him a little bit as my resource.
Well, that sounds great. And the fact that you're not graduating until December means that I'm going to include you on an email. We fund students that are current soy students that are, you know, thinking of launching a business. And so I'll include you in an email with 2 other students that are in a similar position as you and have done some research and are getting ready to launch a business, but aren't graduating, with the potential that maybe we would fund you.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
I'll include you on an email that'll have some information about the Gap Year Fellowship. And if you want, you can just go on RIT's website and just type in Gap Year Fellowship. And actually you'll pull out a bunch of articles from University Communications about different soy students that have been Gap Year Fellows. And that might be something that you want to think about pursuing. We're always looking for not just great business ideas, but just great students that we want to fund. We're really more interested in funding a person than we are funding a business idea that we think is going to be like the next Apple or anything like that. We're looking at trying to support you and what your professional goals are. So anyhow,
Okay,
that's
cool.
my little pitch. I'll include you.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And any other questions from anybody for Dan?
I do want to say to you, Dan, that until this week, I had never heard of the Rochester Commissary. But
Oh, okay.
we have another student in this group who has a project that involves the Rochester Commissary. So I won't say who it is, but at the symposium, you might want to check out the other posters, and no doubt you will meet the other student, and you can share notes of
Awesome.
how you deal with the Rochester Commissary.
Beautiful. Yeah, because they got a few hoops to jump through too on the paperwork and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Thank you.
So just as a reminder, if you've decided that you don't want us to keep your recorded portion, then just let me know. We'll redact that before we upload it to YouTube. It does take us a little bit of time, so it isn't going to happen for a little while. But you can